So before I get into this video, I just want to mention that George here was trained pretty much from the ground up with positive reinforcement and force-free methods. So he has a very positive association with new stimuli and learning new things. So that's part of why I can take this whole process here quite fast. If he was a horse that had, previous trauma or negative associations with, the saddle or the blanket or riding or anything like that, this would take a lot longer of a process to do. So keep in mind that this is not a tutorial on how to get over a fear of a blanket or a saddle. This is just a demonstration of how I introduce a blanket for a very first time to a horse with a blank slate. So right there you saw me sort of testing his reaction to the blanket if I were to walk up beside him. And then now I'm going back to simply letting him touch the blanket and clicking and treating for that. And I'm waiting it out. I'm waiting for him to engage with the blanket. I'm not moving it towards him until he touches his nose to that blanket. This is going to serve as our start button for later on for him to actually have a say in at what point he is ready for me to put on the blanket. You don't have to do this. You don't have to utilize start buttons for blanketing or saddling, but it is my personal preference to utilize them as well as introduce them right at the very beginning. So here all I'm doing is I'm just letting him touch his nose to a blanket, clicking and treating for that. And this is just to introduce the start button. I do this about 3 times, I think, here. And I like to utilize start buttons as a way to introduce more choice into my horse's life, especially for under saddle skills. I want them to be able to let me know when they are ready and when they are no longer okay with a certain thing. And it just adds another layer of communication into their lives. So here, after he touched the nose to the blanket, I actually moved the blanket towards his side as if I were to put it on. This is now to let him know, like, if you touch the blanket, that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to move with the blanket and move besides you. Since he seemed very relaxed and fine about that, I am actually moving on to the next step here, where I touch him with the blanket. He still seems pretty good with that. There was a slight head raise. So in this repetition, I'm actually putting the blanket fully on his back. And you can see he raised his head right there. So that was the indicator for me to stay working on this part of the behavior until he is relaxed about me throwing the pad over his back. I didn't want to move on and then make him more nervous or tossing him over threshold or having him feel like he has to get out of the situation in any way. He's a little distracted right here, so I'm just holding on for him to come back to me and then letting him touch the blanket again, moving besides him, tossing it over his back. Still a little bit of head race, so I'm still keeping on with this part of the behavior. It's very important also to not make the horse touch the blanket and to not move besides him until he touches the blanket. The blanket serves as his indicator of yes, this is ready. And I'm not expecting him to understand this just yet, but over the course of time and repeating this process, he will eventually understand. And he did a lot better on this repetition. He lowered his head, but then raised it slightly when I put the blanket on, but not to the degree that we saw it at the very beginning, so that's improvement. And you can see right there, I started feeding him while the blanket was on him. I didn't take it off and then fed him, but I did feed him again when I took the blanket off. I'm feeding him here twice, just to show him that the blanket on is a good thing, and he's getting food as long as that blanket is on. I take it off again, and I feed him again once I've taken it off. This is to make sure that he doesn't feel like I have to have this blanket on if I want food, and 2, also to make sure that the taking off of the blanket also has a positive association with it. A lot of horses, when they feel the blankets moving off their side, can get scared. And so we want to make sure that he doesn't get scared when the blanket would move off the side or fall off or anything like that. Here, I tossed the blanket a little too far, which made him raise his head again. And I'm asking him to walk forward with the target, partially because the target already has a really positive association with it. So using the target to get the first forward movement with the pad on him makes the whole experience slightly better than if I asked him to walk forward with a halter or lead rope, for example. And I'm only asking him to do this once, so I'm actually going to take the pad off, give him some food for that. And since he was still having issues with the pad being thrown on him, this is what I would be working on in the next session with him. Just continue to counter conditioning that feeling of having that pad thrown on him to make sure that before we continue working on anything else, that he is totally fine with having that pad thrown on him and can stand there nice and relaxed.